Okay, delighted to be joined in the downtown den by Simon Danczuk. Simon, of course, well known to the downtown audience because he's been our chair in London for a number of years, continues to work with us on the policy and research side of the business, but he's been a busy lad. He's been authoring what I think sounds like a fascinating book. And Simon, good day to you, but tell us about this fabulous new publication, new book that you've authored.
Well, thanks for inviting me along as well, Frank, and it's nice to see you as always. Yeah, Scandal at Dolphin Square and Notorious History, and it's just literally landed, quite literally. So there it is. That's the copy. Yeah, straight off the press. And yeah, it's been a long time coming, really. I started writing it with Dan Smith, who's a very reputable author, so I was pleased to work with him. Been working on it about 18 months, and a lot of it got done during the pandemic, actually. And as you know, Frank, I live in Dolphin Square. That's where I am now. So I had a captive audience. I did lots of research, interviewed lots of the older residents in Dolphin Square because they couldn't go anywhere because of the pandemic. And slowly but surely, with Dan, put this book together. So it's all about people who've lived here, past and present, from when it was built in the 1930s right up to the present day. And as the title implies, there's just one or two scandals in there, to say the least.
Tell us some of the names that are included in the book without giving too much away, because you know you wouldn't want to spoil people's reading enjoyment. But who are the sort of characters that you've unearthed who've lived in the square and been embroiled in one or two things?
Yeah, there's probably about 100 characters in the book, more or less. Though there was no shortage, there's probably about 300 that we could have drawn upon. And it's written chronologically. So the place was built in the 1930s by a Liverpool company, actually, Costains, who built it in the 1930s. There's quite a few Liverpool connections to the book as well, actually. And it actually came about, you won't be aware of this, Frank, but you will be aware of the person that sort of prompted me to write it. You remember Nicholas Somerville, who I first met at a downtown in business event in London many years ago now. And he had lived in the square in the 1970s with a guy called John Hervey, who was the Marquis of Bristol, and who was something of a tearaway in the 70s and 80s. And so in long conversations with Nicholas, when we'd go out for drinks and things, he'd reminisce about the occasions they'd spent in Dolphin Square. And that really primed me to start thinking about putting the book together. So Nicholas and the Marquis of Bristol certainly appear in the book. But as I say, it's written chronologically from the 1930s to the present day. So some of the key characters, the big names that people might be familiar with: Oswald Mosley, leader of the fascists in Britain. He'd been a Conservative MP, then a Labour MP, and then went independent and started leading the fascists in the United Kingdom. He got arrested in Dolphin Square and interned during the Second World War because he was on good terms with Adolf Hitler, as you might expect, and so he was considered a threat. So he's one of the first characters that appears who is significant, but many others as well. John Vassell lived here in the 1950s. He was a Soviet spy, got arrested and served 10 years for spying for the Soviets during the 1950s. So he's quite a prominent figure. Christine Keeler from the Profumo scandal. She lived in the square for quite some time. She was a call girl, got embroiled with the Secretary of State for War at the time, Jack Profumo. That became a scandal in its own right. So she certainly lived here. Sid James from the Carry On movies.
Wow.
He took a flat here and carried on with Barbara Windsor. Had an affair with Barbara Windsor at Dolphin Square while he was married, and she was also married to Ronnie Knight, who was something of a gangster, I suppose, is the best way to describe him. So they certainly carried on in Dolphin Square. Many others as well. Peter Finch, quite a famous actor in the 1950s. He was having an affair with Vivian Leigh, who at the time was married to Laurence Olivier. And on it goes, really. Diana Dawes, Shirley Bassey have lived here. More up to date, well, one of the most recent stories is Lord Sewell in 2015, who got stung by the Sun newspaper with two £200 prostitutes in his Dolphin Square flat and allegedly snorting cocaine. And whilst wearing an orange bra as well, according to the video that was taken surreptitiously. So there's been quite a few scandals. That's just a quick flavour of a few of them.
Wow, it sounds absolutely incredible, some of those stories, and I'm sure great to research and even better to read about. And listen, I bet you haven't even included yourself, but we'll perhaps come back to that at another time. When you go about researching this sort of book, it always strikes me that research element and the detail and making sure that you get your facts right, because clearly that's going to be super important for a book such as this. And you've worked in partnership with someone on the book as well. You've co-authored it. But how do you've sort of explained where you got the idea from, just conversations in pubs and so on. That's where the best ideas often emerge from. But how do you start going about, writing that type of book?
Yeah, that's a good question. And Dan Smith, the co-writer, I'd met him probably about 4 years ago now. He was researching for a book that he was writing at the time, The Peer and the Gangster, all about Lord Boothby and the Cray twins. And I had some information that he wanted me to share with him. So we met for a coffee, as I say, about 4 years ago. Fast forward to me having the idea, having spoken to Nicholas Somerville. And I thought, if I want to get this book over the line, get it completed, then I need a co-author. And so I was scratching my head as to who that should be. And I just picked up the phone to Dan, who I'd only ever met for a coffee. And I said, what do you think about writing this book? And he said, great idea. We approached our literary agent, Andrew Lowney, who really liked the idea. And then we set about researching it. And the way that we combined the work effort was, for me, because I'm a researcher by trade anyway, a social researcher. So I did all the press cuttings reviews, reviewed all the press cuttings relating to Dolphin Square from the 30s onwards. And that's a really laborious task, but we're in the middle of lockdown. So I'd sit at the computer, as I am now, with a bottle of wine and just work through these practically every evening. And what I would do is produce a summary of the press cuttings for each individual case and send them to Dan. And then I also conducted a whole variety of interviews with people, either online or in person in the square, with people who had a connection with the square, and sent a transcript of those interviews and conversations to Dan. And then I also went, when the pandemic was lifted, went to Westminster Archives, went through the electoral register. And this will interest you, Frank, because we both have an interest in politics and canvassing and knocking on doors and reading electoral registers. But the law is, or certainly in Westminster, you can't take photocopies of the register. So you have to make notes. You can't even take, so you can't take photos of the register. So it's quite antiquated. So you have to sit there hours on end, trolling through to see who had actually lived there. And trying to, as you say, you need to get it right, trying to corroborate some of the stories that you've picked up, and to make sure your facts are correct. And so that's how we did it. So I did all the research, passed it all to Dan. He's a great wordsmith. And as I think you will find, and readers will find, he's done an excellent job in terms of piecing it all together and telling a story which sets off at a nice steady canter from the 1930s, quickly picks up speed to where we are today.
Yeah, and the 60s were a notorious time of hive of activity, really, in London. And that perfume affair, of course, has been, well, it's been featured in movies, there've been television series. So, that would be a particular chapter that I'd be interested in looking at. It's always been a story that I've found really interesting. And, that sort of brings me on, because I can't let you go without talking about what's happening in the political world at the moment, because so much happening in the political world. And we're talking about scandals. And you do wonder, don't you, people like you and I, who've been embroiled in one or two skirmishes ourselves in the world of politics, how our Prime Minister is currently surviving and has managed to get through a series of events that we know would have seen off most, if not all, previous prime ministers. I just wondered what your take on the current situation was, Simon, as far as the whole is concerned.
Yeah, that's interesting. Boris doesn't have any connection to Dolphin Square, as far as I'm aware. But more what often happens, just as a quick aside, is that when a book is published like this, people often come forward with further stories in the light of the book being published. My first book, Smile for the Camera: The Double Life of Cyril Smith, was published in 2014, and many people came forward after the event to tell us more, and we added a chapter to the paperback based on what people had said subsequently. So we might find in future months that Boris does have some connection here. But returning directly to the point that you've made, yeah, he seems to be almost immune from scandal, doesn't he? And why is that? I think he gets a sympathetic press. I think the media are generally sympathetic to him. I know that might sound contradictory in terms of all the coverage he has had around parties in Downing Street, but nevertheless, over the years, but particularly around his personal life, he's done particularly well in terms of having a sympathetic mainstream media. So that's certainly helped him. And he's also very robust, isn't he? So his personality and his character allows him to sort of front up any controversy that he might face and just push it to one side. And I think he's been very good at that. And the public broadly quite like him as a character. And I think it's a performance on his part, but it seems to be able to get him through the tough world of politics. And how much longer he can survive, I'm unsure. But that famous saying, all politics ends in failure, and I'm sure that will be the case for Boris one day.
Yeah. He's definitely the Houdini of the political world, isn't he? I think, listen, he seems to have come through the worst of it. I was, as you know, was in London earlier this week, and I bumped into a couple of Conservative MPs, and their view is, look, the problem with Boris is he's always got a mistake in him. So even if he gets through this crisis, there's probably another one round the corner. So that they were, just to put this into context, probably not the biggest Boris supporters. So I'm sure you get different views from different people. But as I say, I'm just pretty amazed that he's still there, given what's happened over the last few months. Simon, just tell us where we can get this fabulous book.
Yeah, absolutely. The official publishing date is the 24th of February, but it's been spoke about in the media from now on in, and is attracting quite a lot of interest. It's available at all good bookshops, as they say, and certainly online. If people Google Scandal at Dolphin Square, they'll be able to buy it via Waterstones, Amazon. All the main bookstores are selling it, and you can pre-order it now and get it in a week or so.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to getting my signed copy, and really looking forward to getting stuck into it. And then maybe a Scandal at Dolphin Square too as well.
Quite possibly.
Yeah, good stuff. Simon, great to speak to you as always.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us in the Downtown Den.
If you enjoyed that video, then please subscribe to our YouTube channel on the link below and be among the first to get to listen to all the latest interviews through the Downtown Den.